I never imagined I'd fall for my 60-year-old neighbor, yet even now, when I think back, I can't find the exact moment it began. It wasn't a spark or a glance, nothing cinematic, just a slow warmth spreading where I thought nothing could grow again. My life back then was measured in routines: breakfast at 7, messages from my husband at noon, silence by evening. We lived together like two polite strangers sharing oxygen. He was kind in public, absent in private, always talking about deadlines, markets, things that never included me. I convinced myself that this was what marriage turned into: comfort without closeness, promises without pulse. Across the hedge, he lived quietly. Mr. Harris. Always in the garden, trimming roses with the patience of someone who had nowhere to be. His white hair glowed under the afternoon light. His hands, steady and worn, moved like they remembered tenderness. He waved sometimes. I waved back. Nothing more. I told myself he was just a nice man, a kind neighbor. But something about the way he smiled, soft, never intrusive, lingered in my mind long after I went inside. One morning, I watched him help a stray cat by his porch, his movements gentle and sure. My husband was inside yelling into a headset about a delayed shipment. I stood there, coffee cooling in my hands, realizing how long it had been since anyone around me moved gently for anything. That thought should have disappeared. Instead, it rooted itself somewhere deep. Days folded into each other. He'd greet me when I returned from errands, sometimes hand me a paper I hadn't picked up, sometimes a bag of lemons from his tree. Small things. Too small to matter. Yet every gesture felt heavier than it should have. I caught myself waiting for those tiny exchanges. I'd dress better before stepping outside, pretending it was just habit. Loneliness wears disguises. Mine wore lipstick and a borrowed smile. My husband started coming home later, smelling of fatigue and other people's perfume. Faint, unfamiliar, impossible to confront without proof. I asked once if he was happy. He said, "We have everything we need." I nodded, but the silence afterward sounded like the end of something. That night, lying beside him, I thought about Mr. Harris sitting on his porch, reading, unaware that someone a few feet away envied his peace. Sometimes I heard music from his house, soft jazz, old records. I'd listen through the window while cooking, feeling like a thief stealing fragments of someone else's calm. I told myself it was harmless. It always starts harmless. The mind builds bridges before the heart even knows it's crossing. One afternoon, I found him fixing his mailbox. I stopped to thank him for the lemons. He smiled and said, "They're sweeter when you leave them in sunlight." I didn't know why that sentence made my chest tighten, but it did. He spoke about ordinary things, plants, weather, the ache in his knees, but every word carried patience, the kind that listens before it answers. After that, I began noticing his absence more than his presence. When he wasn't outside, I felt a small, inexplicable emptiness. I'd glance toward his yard, half hoping he'd appear. It wasn't desire yet, not in the way stories define it. It was recognition. Two lonely souls orbiting quietly, pretending not to need each other's gravity. One evening, my husband cancelled dinner again. I ate alone, scrolling through messages that ended in emojis instead of affection. Outside, the neighbor's lights flickered through his curtains. I imagined him reading, or maybe talking to no one, like me. The thought comforted and frightened me at once. That night, as I rinsed my glass, I caught my reflection. Tired eyes, a practiced smile, a woman half alive. I realized how long it had been since anyone had looked at me as though I was still someone worth listening to. The house felt colder than usual. Somewhere beyond the thin wall separating our homes, he was probably sitting in quiet too, unaware that his presence had begun to fill the spaces my marriage had left hollow. I didn't tell anyone, not even myself, that something was changing. Denial can sound like self-control. I told myself I was just being kind, that he was just being neighborly. But deep down, I knew that every shared word, every polite smile, every wave from across the hedge was slowly rewriting the boundaries of right and wrong. Back then, I didn't know loneliness could make you notice things you were never meant to see. I didn't know that the smallest kindness could echo louder than love once it's gone. All I knew was that each passing day drew me a little closer to something I couldn't yet name, and a part of me had already stopped resisting it. It happened on a Thursday evening, one of those dusky hours when the world feels suspended between day and night. The sky was bruised with rain, the kind that starts as a whisper before turning relentless. My husband had messaged that he'd be home late again, another meeting, another excuse I didn't bother questioning. The power flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the house into silence. I stood by the window, watching sheets of rain blur the world outside, until I saw the faint glow from next door. Days became weeks, and the memory of that evening refused to fade. It replayed in fragments, the warmth of his voice, the way the rain softened every word, the tremor in my chest when his hand brushed mine. I told myself to forget, to stay away, but loneliness has a way of finding cracks in resolve. Each morning, I'd glance toward his porch under the guise of checking the weather. When he wasn't there, disappointment crept in like guilt. When he was, I'd wave, pretending it was casual. It never was. It started with messages. Short, harmless ones about errands, groceries, small neighborhood things. He'd thank me for a pie I hadn't baked yet, or ask if my lights were working again. Polite, distant, until they weren't. He sent a message one afternoon. "You looked tired yesterday. Are you sleeping well?" I stared at it for a long time before replying, "Not really. Just a lot on my mind." His response came almost instantly. "You don't have to talk about it, but you can if you want to." That single line felt like permission to exhale. Soon, our conversations spilled beyond messages. We met under excuses, a book he thought I'd like, a plant he said needed care, a cup of tea when the evenings turned cold. Each time, we promised ourselves it was innocent. Each time, we crossed a little further into something that wasn't. He'd tell me stories about his wife, how love could be simple when people listened. I'd tell him things I'd never said aloud, how silence had filled my home, how affection had turned mechanical. He never judged, only listened. And in that listening, I found what I'd been starving for, attention without expectation. The first time he kissed me, it wasn't planned. I had stopped by to return a book. He thanked me, said I always brought warmth into his dull days. I laughed, said, "You underestimate your charm." The words hung between us, too heavy to ignore. He looked at me like he was searching for permission he didn't deserve. I didn't move away. When his lips touched mine, it was soft, almost apologetic, but it burned through every excuse I'd built. I should have left then, ended it before it became real. But I didn't. We began meeting more often, always careful, always afraid. The world outside went on, unaware. I felt young again, alive, terrified. Guilt followed me everywhere. When my husband called me love, when I cooked dinner, when I looked at myself in the mirror. But guilt couldn't compete with the warmth I felt in his arms, the way he made silence feel safe instead of suffocating. He'd touch my cheek and say, "You deserve to be seen." No one had said that to me in years. Sometimes I cried, not from regret, but from the unbearable sweetness of being understood. The affair didn't feel like betrayal at first, it felt like survival. But every time I returned home, the walls seemed to whisper the truth I was trying not to face. My husband's indifference no longer hurt, it mocked me. He'd stopped noticing everything. Me, us, the distance that had swallowed our marriage whole. Still, the guilt deepened. Every small lie, every just stepping out, every "I'll be late," added another stone to the weight inside me. I began to avoid mirrors, afraid of what I'd see, a woman who had traded vows for warmth, love for temporary comfort. Mr. Harris noticed the change too. "You're not smiling anymore," he said one morning as we sat together. "This isn't supposed to hurt you." But it did. The sweetness turned bitter with fear, fear of being found out, fear of losing the one person who had made me feel alive again. The thrill that once fluttered in my chest now ached. I started pulling away, skipping visits, sending shorter replies. Yet when he sent a message that simply read, "Are you okay?" my resolve broke again. By then, it was no longer about desire. It was about dependency. I needed the calm in his voice, the understanding in his silences. I needed what I couldn't find at home. But love that begins in shadows doesn't survive the light. Deep down, I knew the end was coming, I just didn't know who would say it first. Then one night, My phone buzzed with a message from my husband. "We need to talk tomorrow." 5 words that froze me. The walls seemed to close in, and for the first time, I realized what I had done wasn't invisible. Secrets, like smoke, always find a way to be seen. The morning after that message, the world felt heavier. Every sound, every breath carried a sense of inevitability. My husband sat at the kitchen table when I walked in, his phone beside his untouched coffee. He didn't look angry, just tired. "How long?" he asked, his voice too calm. I opened my mouth, but the truth caught in my throat. He nodded slowly, as if my silence was all the answer he needed. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I just want honesty, for once."